July 19th, 1969. Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam. 04:42 hours. The jungle was still asleep when the four-man Australian SAS patrol slipped through the dripping undergrowth, moving in a slow, practiced rhythm known only to men who had spent too many nights in places the maps didn't bother naming. The air hung heavy with moisture, thick enough to drink, thick enough to drown in. Leeches clung to boots, cicadas pulsed like a heartbeat. And somewhere behind them, faint but unmistakable, a distant rumble rolled through the darkness. Sergeant Mark Halverson froze mid-step and raised a clenched fist. Everyone halted. The ground vibrated, just a tremor at first, then another, and another. Corporal Ian Mercer, the team's lead scout, knelt and pressed a palm into the soil. "Boars," he whispered, "a big mob." No one needed convincing. Wild boar packs in Vietnam didn't behave like the farm-fed animals back home. These were towering, razor-tusked jungle beasts, aggressive, unpredictable, and territorial. An adult male could weigh over 130 kilos and run faster than a soldier in full kit. The SAS knew the signs: broken fern tips, churned mud, musky air thick with animal scent. But something else was wrong. The jungle around them was too quiet. Even the cicadas had stopped. Halverson lifted his eyes to the faint gray light bleeding into the canopy overhead. The patrol had been moving toward what the intel marked as a likely Viet Cong courier trail. No problem there. They'd done it hundreds of times, but ahead of them, just beyond the next line of palms, was a shape in the dark that made Halverson's throat tighten. A clearing, perfectly circular, perfectly still, and absolutely wrong. Every SAS patrolman knew the rule: avoid clearings at all costs. Not because of the VC. Enemy ambushes were almost always laid in the jungle, not out in the open. The real danger here was nature itself. Clearings in Vietnam had a reputation, a silent, unspoken one, of being the domain of creatures that didn't fear gunfire, humans, or even fire. Mercer leaned slightly forward, squinting. The soil in the clearing was darker, almost black, scattered with shallow depressions, hoofprints, claw marks, and something much longer, sinuous, trailing in a loose curve toward a half-fallen log near the far edge. He whispered, "Tiger trail and a snake track. Big one." Halverson didn't reply. Behind him, Private Drew Sanderson, the team's radio man and youngest member, swallowed hard. He was tough, capable, and quiet. Perfect SAS material. But even he felt it, the air pressing in, thick with the metallic smell of fear. Not theirs. The jungle's. As if everything around them was holding its breath. Lieutenant Tom Reeves, the patrol commander, gestured for a silent circle. The four men crouched low, faces inches from the ground, while Reeves whispered, "We skirt the southern edge. No entry, no noise, no silhouette exposure." Everyone nodded, except Mercer. He kept staring into the clearing, eyes narrowing. "There's a heat pocket," he mouthed. "A what?" Reeves frowned. Mercer slowly raised his hand and traced a line in the air, showing the lift of thermals invisible to everyone except someone trained to read the jungle like scripture. Hot air rising from a pit. Something buried, or something living. Reeves touched Mercer's arm sharply. The message was clear: don't look. Don't engage. Don't investigate. Not here. They began sliding sideways, inching through ferns, keeping the clearing at their left flank. The boar tremors grew louder, closer, deeper. A full herd now. 24 at least, maybe more. And that was when Sanderson made the mistake. Barely a centimeter of boot leather caught a dry root, just enough to make it crack. A single sharp sound, it echoed. The clearing exhaled, leaves rustled, something enormous shifted near the fallen log. A low, rolling growl vibrated the ground beneath them, a sound no man ever forgets. A tiger's warning, not a threat, a promise. Reeves's hand shot up. Freeze! But the boars had heard the root crack, too. The jungle trembled. The herd thundered toward the clearing in panic, crashing through brush, fleeing something unseen. Maybe another predator. Maybe the scent of the tiger. Maybe the presence of 4 foreign invaders stupid enough to stand between a stampede and open ground. Halverson whispered, "We need cover." But there was none. Just the clearing they were forbidden to enter, and the wall of charging boars tearing through the trees behind them. Reeves made the call no SAS commander ever wanted to make. "Into the clearing! Now!" The four men bolted from the brush as the first boar burst through the foliage behind them, its tusks flashing in the dim light, its eyes wild with primal terror. They sprinted onto the open ground, straight into the domain of the tiger. Behind them, a stampede of death. Ahead of them, the king of the jungle rising from the shadows. And as the sun cracked the horizon, painting the clearing in gold, the Australians realized why other patrols called such places no-go zones. Not because they were empty, but because they were not meant for humans. The moment their boots hit the open soil, every instinct screamed that they had just traded one death for another. The clearing felt wrong underfoot, warm, soft, almost breathing. Halverson could smell it now, strong and musky, the scent mark of a full-grown Indochinese tiger. Not fresh, but not old either. A warning to anything foolish enough to cross into its territory. But there was no time to hesitate. The boar stampede crashed into the tree line behind them like a freight train. Branches snapped, earth shook, leaves exploded outward like shrapnel. The men sprinted toward the far side of the clearing, the only direction not blocked by the oncoming animals. Reeves led with long, silent strides. Halverson followed, rifle up. Mercer flanked right, scanning. Sanderson stumbled once but kept pace. And then, a growl cut through them like electricity. Low, deep, close. The tiger stepped out from behind the half-fallen log. It wasn't charging, not yet. Its massive head lowered, its tail switched once, its amber eyes caught the rising sun, and the four intruders frozen in its domain. Sanderson whispered, voice cracking, "Jesus!" Reeves lifted a hand. "Do not move!" The tiger's shoulders rolled forward in liquid motion, muscles rippling beneath striped skin. It was easily 200 kilograms, larger than most European tigers the men had seen in textbooks. This was a territorial male, perhaps wounded or aged, but still deadly. The kind that preferred ambush, kills from the side. The kind that never bluffed. And worse, the boars behind them were closing in. Halverson could already hear tusks tearing roots from the earth. If the herd broke through the jungle wall, they'd sweep across the clearing in seconds, and the tiger would mistake the men for part of the threat. "Reeves," Mercer whispered, "we're between the hammer and the bloody anvil." Reeves didn't respond. He was watching the tiger's paws. If the pads flexed twice, it meant the animal was preparing to lunge. If it lowered its head further, it meant it was choosing a target. If it bared its teeth, a boar squealed behind them, a high-pitched, terrified scream. The tiger's head snapped toward the sound. Reeves made the call. "Move! Slow! No sudden turns!" The patrol began drifting sideways toward the opposite tree line, steps deliberate, rifles angled low, bodies angled away from the cat to signal they weren't competing for territory. The tiger tracked them with the precision of a sniper. Every step they took, it mirrored with a shift of its weight. 10 meters, 8, 7. The ground behind them erupted. The first boar burst through the foliage with the force of a charging bull. It wasn't attacking, just fleeing. But to the tiger, everything that entered its clearing was a threat. With a deafening roar, the massive cat pivoted, hind legs coiling like springs, and launched. It hit the boar mid-charge, claws sinking deep, jaws clamping around its spine. The impact threw both animals sideways in a blur of muscle and dust. The boar shrieked as the tiger rolled it over, crushing bone and flesh in terrifying efficiency. The SAS men didn't wait to watch. "Go!" Reeves hissed. They sprinted toward the far tree line, boots pounding the soil, breath tearing from their chests. Behind them, the noise of nature at war thundered, a feeding frenzy, growls mixing with agonized squeals, the tearing of flesh, the fury of the clearing's rightful owner reclaiming it. Sanderson looked back once. Mistake. Holy hell, there's more! 2 younger tigers, a mother's nearly grown cubs, had emerged on the ridge beyond the clearing, drawn by the boar chaos. They weren't hunting the SAS yet, but if the patrol stayed in the open for even a moment longer, the cat's instincts would shift. Reeves grabbed the radio man by the collar and yanked him forward. "No stopping! Into the tree line!" They crashed through the foliage on the far side of the clearing, leaving behind the nightmare circle carved into the jungle and lit now by the rising sun. Only once the trees swallowed them did they stop. Halverson bent over, gasping for breath. Mercer checked his rifle and whispered, "That wasn't a clearing. That was a damn feeding ground." Reeves wiped mud from his face and stared back at the sunlit circle. "No," he said quietly. "It was something worse." He touched his map case. That was a place the jungle owns, not the VC, not us. He checked each man's eyes to make sure they understood. And we're never walking through one again. The patrol had survived what most SAS instructors called an unwritten law of Vietnam. If the jungle makes an open space, it's for predators, not people. But they had no idea the worst part was still ahead, because the jungle wasn't done with them, not even close. The moment they pushed deeper into the dense tree line, the sounds of the clearing faded, not because they were far from danger, but because the jungle swallowed noise like a living thing. The canopy closed above them, filtering sunlight into green shafts that flashed across their gear as they moved. Reeves slowed the pace immediately. No one spoke. No one needed to. The rule was simple. When the jungle shows you its teeth, assume it isn't finished. Halverson swept the rear, rifle angled low, scanning for movement. His breathing was under control now, steady but sharp. Behind him, Sanderson kept glancing back over his shoulder despite Reeves's earlier order. Mercer stopped suddenly. "Tracks," he whispered. The team crouched. Before them in the soft mud were paw prints, deep, wide, recent. But not from the massive male they had just seen. These were smaller, lighter, faster. Reeves nodded. "Cubs. Flanking us." Sanderson's eyes widened. Are they following?" Mercer didn't answer. He didn't have to. Cubs learned to hunt by shadowing prey. It was instinctual. They imitated the adult male, stalking, mimicking, practicing kills on anything smaller than them. Humans weren't smaller, but they were slow to tigers and tired. Reeves motioned onward, but the jungle fought them every step. Thorn vines hooked their gear, roots rose like traps beneath the soil, and the earth shifted with hidden hollows that smelled of snake musk, coiled pits left behind by rock pythons. As they climbed a gentle rise, the air changed again. Mercer froze. A faint rattle, not mechanical, natural. Halverson whispered, "That's a king cobra." But Mercer shook his head. "Too deep, too slow. That's a rock python warning coil." Sanderson blanched. "Pythons warn?" "No," Halverson replied. "Only when they're big enough they don't bother hiding." The team edged forward, careful not to disturb whatever the sound belonged to. The vegetation brightened slightly as they neared another patch of open space. Not a clearing this time, but a sunlit dip where the jungle floor glowed gold beneath a break in the canopy. Reeves halted immediately. "Stop. That's a kill pit." Mercer crouched low. "Look, drag marks." Across the clearing ran parallel grooves, smooth and curved, exactly the pattern of a python dragging prey. The grooves vanished at the base of a hollow tree trunk so wide it could have swallowed 2 men. Sanderson whispered, "How big was the python?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Big enough that we're not the top of the food chain here." Reeves scanned the perimeter. "This whole area is a predator corridor." Halverson checked the compass. "Sir, this runs parallel with our intended route." Meaning they'd stumbled right into a highway of death, a natural corridor used by tigers, pythons, and boars as they moved between feeding grounds. No VC needed to be here, no traps, no ambushes. The jungle took care of everything. As Reeves weighed their options, the bamboo to their left trembled. Not wind, movement. Halverson raised his rifle. "Contact. Left." But what emerged wasn't VC. A massive shape burst through the bamboo, brown, bristling, a curved shoulder as tall as Halverson's chest. A boar, but not from the clearing. A different one, a lone male, territorial, unpredictable, often more aggressive than the packs. It spotted them instantly. Sanderson's voice cracked. "It's going to charge." "No sudden movement," Reeves whispered. "Stay grouped. Don't provoke." The boar pawed the ground, snorting, testing their reaction. They stood as still as 4 statues in uniform. The boar snorted again, and suddenly wheeled toward the python pit instead, crashing into the vegetation as it ran. The jungle fell silent again. Sanderson exhaled shakily. Sweat poured down his neck. Mercer looked at Reeves. "Sir, this isn't random. Predators are moving together. Everything's agitated." Reeves nodded grimly. "I know. It wasn't the boars. It wasn't the tigers. It wasn't even the massive python that left drag trails wider than a man. It was something else, something throwing the entire corridor into chaos." Halverson said what the others were thinking. "Sir, What if the big male from the clearing isn't hunting boar anymore? Reeves didn't answer, because the jungle to their rear rustled, softly but deliberately. A sound too heavy for wind, too smooth for a boar, too silent for anything except a predator trained by the wild to stalk ghosts. Reeves whispered the order no one wanted to hear. "Form on me! We're being shadowed!" And the jungle, alive, watchful, hunting, closed in around them. The sound came again, soft, padded, deliberate. Something moving with confidence through thick foliage that would have snagged any human. Reeves didn't look back. That was the first rule when being stalked by a tiger. Don't acknowledge it. Predators read eyes. They sensed fear. They interpreted direct stares as challenge or invitation. Instead, Reeves whispered, "Slow pace, same spacing, no noise, stay predictable." Predictability was safety. Sudden change meant prey and panic, and predators reacted instantly to panic. Halverson eased backward into position, facing the rear now, rifle lowered but ready. Sanderson moved inward toward the patrol's center, breathing shallowly, clutching the radio tight against his chest like a lifeline. Mercer advanced point, leading them up a narrow ridge that sloped gently above the predator corridor. The incline was dangerous, rocks hidden in leaf litter, roots slick with moss, vines that seemed to move underfoot. But the higher ground offered one advantage: tigers rarely attacked uphill. They preferred the kill from above or from the side, where their weight and momentum guaranteed victory. The ridge offered no guarantee of safety, but it offered a chance. As the patrol ascended, the jungle started speaking again. A cicada chirped. A bird flitted overhead. Then silence. The pattern was unmistakable. Mercer murmured, "It's pacing us, keeping distance." Halverson felt the hairs on his arms rise. He whispered, "How far?" Mercer hesitated. He listened. He breathed. His eyes flicked toward the dense palms below. 20 meters, maybe less. Too close. Reeves knew this couldn't continue. The tiger wasn't hunting them out of hunger. Something had put it into a frenzy. The boars were running wild, the pythons were restless, even the birds had vanished from certain branches. Something upstream in the food chain had shifted. He raised a fist. The patrol froze. They crouched behind a fallen log, dripping with fungus and laced with vines. Sanderson positioned the radio behind him and gripped his rifle with trembling fingers. Reeves turned to Mercer and Halverson. "We need to break the line of sight. Tigers don't like losing eyes on prey." Mercer nodded. "Bamboo thicket ahead, dense enough to hide us if we move slow." Halverson frowned. "Pythons like bamboo," Mercer smirked. "So do we. Pick your poison." The bamboo wall loomed ahead, thick, dark, and swaying slightly, even though the air was still. Each stalk was as thick as a man's wrist, creating a vertical labyrinth of shadows. Reeves whispered the plan. "We move in. Single file, no gaps, no light silhouette. If you hear movement, don't run. Running triggers the chase." Sanderson swallowed hard. "What if it comes into the thicket?" Mercer's voice was quiet. "Then it's choosing a kill." Sanderson's breath hitched. Reeves led them into the bamboo. The world changed instantly. The air cooled, light dimmed, shadows multiplied. The bamboo creaked softly as the patrol squeezed between stalks, each movement deliberate and silent. Their bodies brushed leaves coated in dew. Their boots sank into soft earth laced with animal trails. A distant cracking sound echoed behind them. Not bamboo. Footsteps. The tiger was entering the corridor. Halverson whispered, "It's following." Reeves didn't turn. "Stay low. Stay silent." The bamboo absorbed sound but also magnified sudden movement. One wrong shift could snap a stalk, and one snap could bring the tiger charging blindly into the thicket. Mercer made a downward gesture. They crouched lower. The bamboo around them trembled, just slightly, like something large was testing its edges, feeling its way, reading the battlefield. Cubs might explore bamboo, but an adult male entering willingly? That meant obsession, or desperation. The tiger wasn't just tracking them, it was hunting them now. Reeves felt the familiar coldness settle into his spine, the knowledge that nature, not the Viet Cong, had become their most lethal enemy. They moved deeper, 10 meters, then 15, until the bamboo began to thin. A faint patch of green light shimmered ahead. Mercer raised a hand sharply. He pointed to the ground, tracks, fresh, wide. circular depressions in the mud, but not tiger prints. Sanderson knelt, puzzled. "What's that? Another boar?" Mercer's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "Worse." Reeves crouched beside him. It wasn't a paw print, it wasn't a hoof. It was a heavy, dragging mark, interrupted every few meters by a deep, round indentation. Halverson stared. "A python?" Mercer nodded slowly. "A massive one." The dragging trail was nearly a meter wide, and it led straight into the thinning bamboo. Reeves clenched his jaw. They had reached the one place all predators converged, the nexus of the corridor. A territory so rich with prey, so critical to the jungle ecosystem, that even apex hunters crossed paths and sometimes fought for dominance. It wasn't just a corridor, it was a battlefield, and they were standing in the middle of it. Behind them, the bamboo shook harder. The tiger was pushing deeper. Ahead of them, the python trail sank into shadows. Reeves breathed deeply, weighing the impossible. Forward meant snakes. Backward meant tigers. He whispered the only command left: "Choose forward." And the patrol stepped toward the python's path, into the heart of the jungle's most dangerous ground. The ground dipped as they followed the python's trail, the air growing colder, thicker, almost syrup-like. Every jungle scent, earth, rot, damp leaves, mixed with something oily and reptilian. The python had passed through here recently. Very recently. Reeves slowed the patrol to a crawl. His hand sign, Silence Plus, full caution, a signal they rarely used, reserved only for minefields, or predators, large enough to make mines seem preferable. The bamboo thinned into a low grove of broadleaf vegetation that looked like umbrellas pressed together. Light filtered in a shimmering green haze, illuminating the long indentation the python had carved. The soil was smooth where its belly had slid, like a river of mud frozen mid-flow. Sanderson stared at the trail, eyes wide. "Sir, the width. This thing is huge." Mercer didn't look up. 5, maybe 6 meters. Could be 8 if it's on a big meal. Halverson felt the hairs on his neck rise. "Where does something like that even hide?" Mercer pointed to the dense shadow beneath a fallen cluster of palms. "Anywhere it damn well wants." Reeves cut the chatter with a gesture. "Focus forward." The jungle suddenly seemed more alive, more alert, watching them. Every movement was measured, every breath was quiet, even the floor felt unstable. Hollow sections where the python had coiled underground, or trails from smaller snakes slipping away from the giant returning home. And behind them, the bamboo groaned, a slow creak, a soft snap, a predator's exhale. The tiger had entered the corridor. Sanderson tensed, nearly twisting around, but Halverson steadied him with a firm grip. "Eyes forward," he murmured. "He'll strike if you flinch." Reeves pushed them deeper into the grove, leaving the corridor of bamboo and entering a darker patch of jungle where the light barely penetrated. The ground sloped downward again, into a shadowed basin choked with ferns. The python's trail curved left, then abruptly disappeared. Mercer lifted a hand, signaling halt. "What do you see?" Reeves whispered. Mercer crouched lower. It doubled back. Sanderson exhaled shakily. "Why would it turn around?" Halverson answered, voice low. "Because it sensed us. Pythons don't run. They reposition." The grove darkened around them. Reeves scanned every root, every trunk, every shadow. The python could be anywhere. Coiled in branches overhead, buried beneath leaves, wrapped around a tree trunk perfectly camouflaged. And then he saw it. A faint ripple. A slow, sinuous movement beneath a pile of rotting leaves just 3 meters ahead. Not lunging, not coiled, not preparing, waiting. Pythons didn't waste energy. They hunted smart. They hunted with patience, and a 4-man patrol meant heat, scent, and vibration, 10 times more tempting than a wild pig. Halverson mouthed, "It's here." Reeves nodded once, raising 2 fingers. A silent vector pivot. The team shifted slightly right, avoiding the python's cover while keeping eyes locked on the leaves. Every step was soft enough not to disturb the air. Every muscle tight with controlled fear. Then a rustle behind them. Not bamboo this time, not branches. A low rumbling growl vibrating through the earth. The tiger. It had closed the distance. Sanderson's throat tightened. "Sir." Reeves didn't turn. A turning soldier was a fleeing prey animal. He whispered, "Stay steady. Don't break line. We move to the ridge. The ridge loomed ahead, barely 6 meters of steep, root-tangled slope, but high enough to give them a fighting chance. Tigers hated uncertain footing. Pythons preferred flat ambush zones. The ridge was their only sanctuary. Go! Now! They climbed. Boots slid on damp soil. Hands gripped roots slick with moss. Halverson boosted Sanderson upward, pushing him toward a half-exposed tree trunk. Below, the python erupted. Leaves exploded upward in a burst of motion as the massive snake lunged, not at the men but at the boar stampede's scent still clinging to their gear. The movement was so sudden, so powerful, that it sent a shock wave through the clearing, shaking nearby branches. Sanderson screamed, scrambling up the trunk. Reeves grabbed Mercer's arm and hauled him up the slope. Halverson was the last to climb. He turned just long enough to see the python coiling, thrashing, searching for the source of the vibration. And the tiger, stepping through the bamboo into full view. 2 apex predators now stood between the patrol and their route home. Reeves dragged Halverson up the ridge by his harness. "Move! Higher!" As they scrambled over the crest, the jungle below erupted in chaos. Tiger roars, the whip crack of python coils. The crackle of bamboo crushed under unimaginable force. The patrol stood on the ridgeline, panting, shaking, slick with sweat and mud. Mercer stared down into the shadows. "Sir," he said quietly, "we've wandered into something ancient." Reeves nodded grimly. "A battlefield older than any war here." And then he added the words none of them wanted to hear. "And we're not out of it yet." Because from the far side of the ridge, something else moved, something that wasn't tiger, wasn't python, wasn't boar, something human. The sound drifted over the ridge in a way no animal movement ever did. Rhythmic, deliberate, and faintly metallic. A soft clink, then a shuffle of fabric, then silence. Not jungle noise, not predator noise. Human. Reeves dropped to one knee instantly, raising a clenched fist. The patrol flattened themselves along the ridgeline, each man sinking into the ferns, rifles angled down the slope. Sanderson steadied his breathing, gripping the radio so tightly his knuckles whitened. Halverson mouthed, "VC?" Mercer listened. Really listened, letting the jungle filter through his senses. After a moment, he shook his head. Too few, too quiet, too controlled. Reeves understood immediately. "Scouts," he whispered. "Maybe trackers." But what were trackers doing this deep into a predator corridor? No units, American, Australian, or Viet Cong, moved through these zones intentionally. They were too dangerous, too unstable, too alive. Unless someone had a reason. Unless someone had been forced here by the same thing driving the wildlife into chaos. The metallic sound came again, closer now. Reeves slowly crawled forward, parting a curtain of leaves just enough to glimpse the slope below. 2 figures emerged, crouched low, AK rifles slung across their chests, barefoot, lean, alert, moving with the fluid, ground-sensing cadence of veteran Viet Cong trackers. One held a machete, the other carried a small coil of wire, trip line likely pulled from a broken trap. Halverson whispered, "They're resetting something?" Mercer's voice was tight. "No. They're following something." Sanderson swallowed. "Us? Or the tiger?" Mercer said. Maybe both." Reeves watched the pair with intense focus. The VC were nervous, heads snapping at every rustle, hands gripping rifles tightly. These weren't hunters. They were men trying desperately not to become part of the food chain. Then one of them knelt suddenly. He touched the ground, pressed fingers into the soil, lifted them to his nose. Mercer hissed, "He's scent tracking. He knows someone passed here." Reeves clenched his jaw. If the VC identified the patrol's trail, they'd call in more fighters, and an SAS team pinned between hostile scouts and apex predators was dead, even with perfect training and gear. Halverson whispered, "Sir, we can flank them before they radio." Reeves shook his head. Gunfire or shouting would carry for kilometers, and the tiger, still engaged in a primal battle with the python, could shift its target at the slightest disturbance. Even a single rifle crack could turn the ridge into a killing ground. "Negative," Reeves murmured. "No shots, no contact. We wait." The patrol stayed motionless as the 2 VC scouts crept below them, scanning the ridge with narrowed eyes. The sun shifted, casting long shadows. The air thickened with the smell of churned earth and predator musk. Below, The python thrashed once more, an enormous, sickening sound, and the tiger roared again, a booming, chest-rattling bellow that vibrated through the ridge. The VC froze in terror. One dropped into a crouch. The other took a step backward, machete trembling in his grip. Mercer leaned close to Reeves. "They're as scared as we are." Reeves nodded. "This isn't a hunt anymore, it's survival." And then the moment came that changed everything. A sudden crack echoed from deeper in the jungle. Not bamboo breaking under an animal's weight, but the sharp, unmistakable snap of a twig crushed by a boot. Another human. The VC scout spun toward the sound, rifles raised. Reeves tensed. If another VC team appeared, the ridge would become a firefight. The predators below would hear it instantly. Chaos would erupt. But it wasn't VC that emerged. A single man stepped into view, uniform torn, chest heaving, stumbling as if chased by demons themselves. Not Viet Cong, North Vietnamese Army. He fell forward, collapsing into the dirt. The two VC scouts rushed to him, speaking urgently in hushed tones. The man pointed backwards with shaking hands, eyes wide with primal fear. Mercer strained to hear. He caught one word, just one. But it was enough. "Ho!" "Tiger." Reeves exhaled a curse under his breath. If NVA soldiers were being driven from behind, running blindly into VC territory, then the entire predator corridor was collapsing. The tiger wasn't hunting one patrol. It was tearing through everything in its path, pushing wildlife and humans alike into unnatural collision. Halverson whispered, "Sir, if that thing comes up the ridge—" "It won't," Reeves said, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Because the ridge was narrowing. The predators were agitated. Humans and animals were mixing in places none of them should have been. The jungle was compressing into a single, lethal point. And the SAS patrol was right in the middle of it. Reeves made a decision. "We move east," he whispered. "Away from the corridor, away from the predators, but before this entire jungle turns into a stampede." Sanderson nodded quickly, relief flickering across his face. But Mercer hesitated. "Sir," he whispered, "if we go east, we pass through another clearing." Reeves stared at him. "Another one?" Mercer nodded. "A dead one. No vegetation, no movement." Halverson felt a chill run through him. "Why's it dead?" Mercer answered in a tone barely audible. "Because nothing, not even the jungle, wants to live there." Reeves tightened his grip on his rifle. "We take it," he said. "Predators behind us, unknown ahead. But at least the unknown isn't hunting us." He looked at each man in turn. "Stay tight. Stay silent. Stay alive." The patrol slipped along the ridge, and as they disappeared into the foliage, the tiger roared again. Closer this time. Far closer. The jungle was awake, and it wasn't letting them go without a price.